Hello there, and welcome to the Sleep Science Galaxy channel. Right now, there is nothing you need to do. Let the long day gently drift away, allow your breath to slow down, and let your mind loosen its grip, as if you were floating freely in the quiet vastness of the universe. In this safe and tender space, we won't rush to find answers. We will simply listen to the story of how everything once began. Tonight, instead of counting sheep, let the stars guide you. Instead of thinking, allow your imagination to drift with the rhythm of space and time as they slowly expand. This is not just a science video. It is a meditative journey where the universe softly and deeply tells the story of itself. If these silent voyages bring you a sense of peace, gently tap the like button and subscribe. Just a small gesture, so that more weary minds may find their way back to sleep among the stars. The foundational question: the origin of everything. There is a very strange moment in the journey of human intelligence. It is not when we discover an answer, but when we pause long enough to ask a question so vast that it causes every other thought to fall silent. In that quiet space, when the breath slows and the familiar world gently recedes, the question appears softly, without noise, without urgency. Where did the universe come from? This is not a question belonging only to science, nor solely to philosophy. It is as ancient as human consciousness itself. Once whispered beside primitive fires, carved into stone, written into sacred texts, and today posed through giant telescopes pointed toward the night sky. Yet despite its changing forms, the feeling it evokes remains the same. A gentle sense of awe, as if the mind were standing before a shoreless ocean. When we ask where the universe comes from, we are, in truth, touching the outer edge of our own capacity to think. Every familiar question we have ever asked rests upon things that already exist. A cause leading to an effect, a space that holds objects, a timeline in which events unfold. But here, space and time themselves become the subject of the question. We are no longer standing on familiar ground, we are stepping beyond the map. And it is precisely there that science, often seen as certain and exact, suddenly becomes unexpectedly humble. The most refined equations, models, and data humanity has devised can only take us to a point very near the edge, and then they stop. Not because there is nothing beyond, but because the language of mathematics and physics, like all languages, has its limits. There are places where it no longer has words. This is not a failure. On the contrary, it is a profoundly beautiful moment. For in that instant, science and meditation touch one another. Both teach us how to rest with the unknown without rushing to fill it with easy answers. Both invite us to pause, to observe the feeling of uncertainty, and to recognize that it is precisely this ambiguity that opens the door to depth. When we were children, the world seemed full of ready explanations. The sun rises because it is morning. The sun sets because it is night. Everything felt complete, neatly enclosed. But as we grow older, especially when we begin to look up at the night sky and truly let it sink in, those old answers grow thin. We realize that the more we understand, the more clearly we see how little we truly know. And paradoxically, that realization itself is a sign of an awakening intelligence. The question of the universe's origin does not demand an immediate answer. It only asks that we allow it to exist in the mind, like a small lamp-kindling curiosity. From its initial emotion, perhaps wonder, perhaps unease, the question slowly transforms into a very special kind of curiosity. curiosity that seeks to possess, but curiosity that listens. Not curiosity that rushes to conclude, but one that continues to walk forward. Here, humanity confronts its own limits. We are beings born within the universe, made of the material of stars. Yet we attempt to understand the entire picture of which we are only a tiny stroke. Our brains evolved to survive on a single planet over a brief span of time, and yet we use them to contemplate billions of years and billions of galaxies. That imbalance is both humbling and miraculous. Perhaps that is why this question never grows old. Each generation asks it in a different way, with different tools, yet the core feeling remains unchanged. It is the feeling of standing before something far greater than oneself, and realizing that one does not need to control it in order to find meaning. Simply participating, simply asking the question, is already enough. In the slow rhythm of cosmic science, this moment is like a pause, a rest note. After the greeting, after the initial relaxation, we do not rush straight into concepts or events. We stop here, where the first question is asked. For without that question, all the data that follows would be nothing more than numbers passing through the ears. But once the question is present, everything that comes after carries a different weight. It becomes part of a larger story. And importantly, this question does not require tension. It is not an exam. Within the space of sleep and relaxation, it can be held very lightly, like a small pebble in a pocket, reminding us that beyond daily worries, there exists a reality far more vast, gently enclosing everything. When we allow our minds to touch the question of the origin of everything, we also step for a moment outside the narrow self. Personal anxieties, time pressures, and the repetitive stories in our heads lose some of their weight. Not because they are unimportant, but because we are now viewing them from a new distance, a cosmic distance. And it is precisely there that intellectual curiosity is awakened. Not curiosity that seeks to argue right or wrong, but a contemplative curiosity. A gentle curiosity, slow enough to move with the breath, deep enough to need no conclusion. It whispers that we may never know the complete answer, yet this very act of questioning is itself part of the universe's story. In that quietness, the question, "Where did the universe come from?" is no longer a challenge. It becomes an invitation to embark on a journey of exploring not only the outer world, but the inner space within ourselves. And when we accept that invitation, even for a few minutes before drifting into sleep, we have truly begun the voyage. The universe is not static. Expansion. As the question of the origin of everything gently settles within the mind, a soft silence opens up. It is not an emptiness, but a waiting space, one in which the mind stops trying to grasp and begins to listen. And within that quiet pause, the universe offers a subtle hint, not through words, but through motion, a silent, persistent motion that began long before humans ever learned to look up at the sky with scientific eyes. The universe is not standing still. It is expanding. At first, this idea may cause the mind to hesitate. We are used to thinking of the sky as a fixed backdrop, where stars hang suspended, unchanging, eternal. For thousands of years, humanity lived with this sense of order. Earth at the center, the heavens revolving around it, and the structure of the cosmos seemingly unaltered. But then, not so long ago in history, the very silence of the stars began to whisper something different. The earliest telescopes did not bring comfort, they brought disturbance. When humans learned to split light into its delicate bands of color, they discovered that the light from distant galaxies did not resemble the familiar light emitted by nearby stars. It was stretched, elongated, gently shifted toward the red end of the spectrum, like a melody slowed down as it moves away from the listener. Not one galaxy, not a few, but nearly all of them. In the quiet halls of observatories, this at first appeared as a curious detail. But gradually, as data accumulated, as measurements repeated themselves with the same result, a new picture began to emerge. Galaxies seemed to be moving away from one another. And even more strangely, the farther a galaxy was, the more its light was stretched, as if it were drifting away faster within an invisible current. This was not like an explosion scattering fragments outward. There was no center to identify, no original point to return to. Instead, the space between galaxies itself was growing. Distance was not merely being measured. It was being created. Space, which we often think of as a passive backdrop, turned out to be an active entity, capable of expanding, capable of change. To help the human mind touch this idea without becoming overwhelmed, science borrowed a simple, everyday image. Imagine a loaf of bread rising as it bakes. Within the dough, raisins are scattered, initially quite close to one another. As the bread expands, no raisin crawls away on its own. Yet each raisin sees all the others moving farther away. The distance increases not because the raisins travel through the dough, but because the dough itself is expanding. The universe is the same. Galaxies are not racing through empty space. The space between them is gently and continuously stretching. There is something deeply meditative in this image. No panic, no violent collisions, only an opening that happens everywhere at once, without preference, without selection. Every point in the universe can consider itself the center, because from any viewpoint, everything else is moving away. This is not motion with a direction, but a transformation of the underlying structure itself. Once this idea is understood, it does more than change astronomy. It unsettles the way humans think about time and history. For if the universe is expanding today, then in the past it must have been smaller. And if we continue tracing that flow backward, we arrive at a time when all distances were compressed, when everything was closer together, hotter, denser. There is no need to rush toward conclusions. This thought alone is enough to open a new doorway in the imagination. What is remarkable is that the discovery of expansion did not arise from a deliberate search for an ultimate answer. It emerged from patient observation, from listening to light, from allowing data to speak in ways intuition did not expect. There is a quiet humility in that moment of science. Rather than forcing the universe to fit preconceived ideas, humanity chose to listen and to adjust its understanding. Within the slow rhythm of this journey, this discovery acts like a bridge. It connects the abstract question of origins with concrete evidence, measurable, testable. It guides the listener from a vague emotional wonder into a more structured curiosity without losing gentleness. We are not required to understand everything at once. We only need to sense that the universe is alive, in motion, changing. As this idea gradually settles in, something subtle happens within the mind. The expansion of the universe ceases to be merely a scientific concept. It becomes a metaphor for human experience itself. Everything in life changes. No state remains fixed forever. Distances in emotion, in thought, in awareness can also open, not always because we push them apart, but because the foundation beneath them has shifted. In the context of sleep and relaxation, The idea of an expanding universe can feel deeply safe. There is no rush, no destination to reach, only a process unfolding, slower than any heartbeat, wider than any worry. And within this process, humans are not outsiders. We are part of that motion, carried along with space and time. Expansion also reminds us that knowledge is never static. What was once considered certain can be widened, renewed, when we have enough patience and enough courage to look again. The universe does not betray humanity by changing. It simply reflects the growth of human understanding. And so, from a quiet question about origins, we arrive at a new awareness. The universe is not a picture hanging on a wall, but a flow that is not loud, not dramatic, but continuous and irreversible. As the mind rests in this thought, there is no need to cling to every detail. It is enough to let the sense of motion support you, like drifting very slowly through an open space, where everything is moving away, yet in the gentlest possible way. The Big Bang, not an explosion. As the idea of the universe's expansion has had time to spread through the mind, like a slow wave opening outward without boundaries, a new question quietly arises. If all distances are growing, if space itself is unfolding, then what happened at the moment when that unfolding began? Not as an impatient curiosity, but as something natural, like tracing the breath back to its point of origin. And it is here that a familiar name appears in human memory, often spoken with dramatic emphasis, yet, in truth, needing to be listened to with a deeper stillness. The Big Bang. In popular imagination, the Big Bang is often pictured as a violent explosion, a dramatic instant that tears through darkness, hurling matter outward into space. This image is very human, very cinematic, and easy to grasp. We are used to explaining beginnings through collisions, loud noises, and obvious motion within a space that already exists. But the universe, in its subtlety, chose a different path. There was no thunderous blast echoing through silent emptiness, because at that moment, emptiness itself did not yet exist for any sound to echo within. What modern science attempts to describe, with all its caution and humility, is not an event that happened somewhere in space, but the moment when space itself began. There was no center, no outer edge, no inside or outside. Every point was simultaneously a point of origin. Everywhere was where everything began. And if this sounds paradoxical, it may be because the mind is still trying to use old frameworks to grasp a reality without precedent. Seen through this lens, the rhythm of the story changes completely. The Big Bang is no longer a noisy instant, but an opening. Not destruction, but emergence. Not matter rushing through space, but space itself coming into being along with matter. Time, too, did not flow from a clock that had already been wound. It began to flow together with that very event. Asking what happened before is like asking where north of the North Pole lies. The question itself has moved beyond the familiar frame of reference. In this slow telling, the Big Bang is not presented as a final answer, but as a boundary. A very special boundary, where the equations humanity relies on begin to lose their guiding power. The physical theories we use to describe stars, galaxies, and even the expansion of the universe, when pushed back toward those earliest moments, gradually fade. Numbers become infinite. Quantities become undefined. Not because the universe turns chaotic, but because our tools are not yet refined enough to follow it further. There is a profound beauty in acknowledging this limit. Rather than filling the gap with confident stories, science chooses to pause, to mark the place where current understanding can no longer proceed. This does not weaken the story. On the contrary, it makes it more honest and deeply human. For here the scientist and the meditator share the same posture, knowing when to observe and when to remain silent. When the Big Bang is understood as the birth of space and time, it also transforms how we sense our own existence. We are no longer creatures living inside a universe that was fully built and then happened to include us. We are the result of a continuous process, beginning with that first moment and never having stopped. Every atom in our bodies, every heartbeat, every passing thought lies along the same stream that flows from that original opening, within the context of relaxation and the approach of sleep. This perspective offers a very different feeling. Instead of being overwhelmed by an unimaginably vast event, we can sense the Big Bang as a first breath. There is no need to imagine how large it was or how powerful. It is enough to feel that there was a moment long ago when everything began to open, and that this opening has been continuing ever since, even as we lie still in the darkness. What matters is that the Big Bang is not a conclusion. It does not explain everything. It simply tells us that from a very early, very hot, very dense state, the universe entered a long journey of change. What triggered that moment, whether anything existed before it, and if so, what its nature might have been? All of these remain open questions, and perhaps they should remain open, for it is precisely this openness that drives humanity to keep observing, to keep reflecting, to keep dreaming. In this slow rhythm of storytelling, adjusting our understanding of the Big Bang is not meant to shock or overturn old beliefs, but to gently soothe a deeply rooted misunderstanding. When we stop imagining a deafening explosion, we also release the sense of chaos and violence from the story of origins. In its place, we can see a universe that began with expansion, with potential, with a state that held every possibility. And within that gentleness, the story keeps its slow breath. It does not rush forward. It does not demand full comprehension. It simply invites the listener to remain a little longer with the thought that science, at its deepest edge, is not always about knowing more, but about knowing enough to recognize how much remains unknown. This is where knowledge becomes contemplation, and where the story of the universe is no longer a chain of events, but an unfolding journey, open, ongoing, and still whispering softly in the quiet of the night. The Planck era and the limits of physics. As the story of the moment when space and time first unfolded begins to settle, a very subtle sensation spreads through the mind. We have arrived at a point where familiar language is no longer sufficient to describe what lies there, where images of creation grow hazy as if seen through a thin veil of mist. Yet instead of stopping completely, science gently takes one more step forward, not with certainty, but with caution. There exists an unimaginably brief interval, lying immediately after that initial opening, where everything is still too unfamiliar to be fully named, yet close enough for us to sense the universe's very first breath. This interval is so short that if the entire history of the universe were stretched across a single day, it would occupy less than the blink of an eye. A moment almost impossible to imagine, where the familiar measures of human experience entirely lose their meaning. No seconds, no minutes, no distances in the sense we normally use them, only extreme numbers and a reality that exceeds all intuition. In that moment, the universe was so small that space and energy blended together like a swirling current. The temperature was so high that all forms of structure dissolved. The forces we are familiar with today, the force that holds planets in orbit, the force that allows magnets to attract, the force that binds atomic nuclei were not yet separate entities. They had not had time to part and take on different names. They existed as a single, unified expression, like a symphony before its voices divide into parts, one deep and primordial melody. For the modern mind, this is both captivating and disorienting. We are accustomed to classifying, to dividing the world into manageable pieces. But here, all divisions collapse. The universe in that instant does not allow us to stand outside as observers. It draws everything into a single extreme state, where differences have not yet come into being. And because of this, even the most powerful theories humanity has created begin to falter. There is something profoundly human in the way science approaches this territory. Instead of declaring understanding, it admits that it has only reached the edge. Equations that work beautifully to describe galaxies or subatomic particles, when pushed back toward that earliest moment, begin to contradict one another. Not because the universe is wrong, but because the map no longer matches the terrain. The concepts of smooth space and continuous time, which form the foundation of current understanding, begin to tremble. Most striking of all is the appearance of a vast gap in knowledge, not a gap born of insufficient effort, but of the absence of a shared language. On one side lies the grand picture of gravity, where space and time curve in response to mass and energy. On the other lies the quantum world, where everything dances in probabilities and uncertainty. Each is true within its own domain, yet when the universe was so small and hot that everything merged together, they refused to coexist on the same page. Like two exquisite instruments that have not yet found a common key in which to harmonize. And so, humanity stands before a very special boundary. Not the boundary of the universe, but the boundary of understanding. A place where we know enough to realize that we cannot yet know more. A place where answers are not hidden by mystery, but by the limits of our cognitive tools. Seen through hurried eyes, this might feel like disappointment. But in this slow, gentle telling, it carries a profound beauty. For here, science ceases to be a journey of conquest and becomes a journey of listening. It teaches us how to rest with uncertainty, how to respect questions that have no answers yet. This is deeply aligned with the spirit of meditation. In meditation, we do not force the mind to reach a particular state. We simply observe what is present, including vagueness, including emptiness. And in studying the earliest moment of the universe, science is doing something very similar. As this idea slowly sinks in, the sense of human smallness no longer feels threatening. Instead, it brings a gentle sense of release. We do not need to possess all the answers to feel that we belong in the cosmic story. Simply knowing that there are regions of knowledge still open, still waiting, is enough to awaken a deep humility. And it is precisely this humility that forms the foundation of all genuine progress. Within the space of sleep and relaxation, being guided to this boundary is not meant to strain the mind. It is like standing at the edge of the sea at night, gazing toward where light no longer reaches. We do not need to swim out into the darkness. It is enough to stand there, feel the wind, hear the waves, and know that ahead lies an ocean far larger than any map. The universe, in its earliest moment, is such an ocean. And perhaps the most important thing this territory offers is not information, but an attitude of openness. Openness to the possibility that current understanding is only one chapter in a much longer book. Openness to the idea that what is mysterious today may become familiar tomorrow, if humanity continues with patience and creativity. Openness to the truth that not knowing is not failure, but the starting point of every discovery. As the story moves on from this moment, the listener carries not a burden of knowledge, but a very delicate feeling. The feeling of having touched the edge of what can be known. And in that touch, there is a strange peace. For the boundary of knowledge is not a closed wall, but a horizon. The closer we approach, the farther it recedes, inviting us to continue the journey with gentle curiosity and a mind calm enough to accept that the universe will always be wider than any answer we are able to hold. Cosmic inflation. As the mind has just touched the boundary of what can be known, where scientific language begins to slow and silence becomes necessary, a new movement quietly emerges. Not loud, not dramatic, yet carrying a strange energy. As if the universe, after holding its breath at the edge of knowledge, suddenly exhales deeply. And within that breath, space does not merely expand, it bursts open, far beyond any intuition of speed or scale. There is something profoundly difficult to grasp about this phase, because it unfolds far more quickly than any human experience can contain. If the entire history of the universe were a thick book, this moment would be no more than a tiny dot. Yet it reshapes the entire structure of the story. In a span of time so brief it almost does not exist by ordinary meaning, the universe swelled violently, like a small seed suddenly blooming into an entire field before we even realize we are watching. This expansion is unlike the gentle stretching we have learned to imagine. It does not allow us to follow it step by step. It happens all at once, everywhere, without a center, without boundaries. Space stretches itself so rapidly that even light, the fastest thing we know, cannot outrun that expansion. This may sound paradoxical, but only when we try to force it into familiar frameworks. If we soften, if we allow the idea to pass through the mind like a wave, it carries a strangely gentle quality. In the slow rhythm of meditation, we can sense this moment as a kind of release. After an extremely compressed state, where everything was nearly pressed into one another, the universe is suddenly allowed to relax, like a string pulled too tight for too long, finally let go. Not an act of violence, but a return to balance. A natural process, guided by deep conditions we are only beginning to name. Hidden behind this sudden expansion lies a subtle concept, difficult to visualize, yet essential. A form of energy permeating the early universe like an invisible tension in the fabric of reality, holding space in a state ready to burst open. It is not an object, nor a force in the familiar sense. It is more like a condition, a latent possibility woven into the structure of existence itself. When this condition dominates, space has no option but to expand, rapidly, enormously. And like all unstable states, this explosive expansion does not last forever. It ends as quietly as it began, without sound, without a clear signal. But when it settles, the universe does not return to what it was before. Instead, the energy that once drove the expansion transforms, spreading throughout space and heating everything up. A warm wave sweeps through, awakening particles, giving rise to a vibrant sea of energy and matter. This is the moment when the universe begins to take on more familiar traits, when light, particles, and motion slowly become concepts we can touch. Within this context, something that seems contradictory takes place. It is precisely this incredibly rapid expansion that creates uniformity. Regions of space that are unimaginably far apart today were once close enough to share the same initial conditions. As a result, the later universe carries a remarkable smoothness, like a vast lake reflecting a single sky. And within that same expansion, tiny ripples, delicate fluctuations, are stretched out, becoming the seeds of all future structure. When we reflect on this, we can feel a deep connection between the very large and the very small. Galaxies, clusters of stars, and immense cosmic voids we observe today can trace their origins back to fragile vibrations in those earliest moments. There was no predetermined plan, no detailed blueprint, only possibilities unfolding, later woven into form by time and gravity. In the space of relaxation, this idea does not need to be fully understood by the intellect. It can be felt as a rhythm of opening, then settling, of bursting forth, then stabilizing, like a deep breath in meditation, where we inhale fully and exhale slowly. In that moment, the universe itself seems to be learning how to breathe. What makes this phase special is not only its speed or scale, but its role in the larger story. Without this violent opening, the universe might have turned out very differently, perhaps more chaotic, more uneven, or incapable of forming delicate structures at all. That initial expansion is like smoothing out a vast fabric, creating a wide foundation upon which later patterns can appear. And in this slow telling, it carries a very gentle message. Sometimes, lasting stability requires a moment of profound change. Sometimes, order is born only after an expansion beyond all old limits. The universe does not fear passing through extreme states because it has time, an immense amount of time. As the mind rests in this image, we are not drawn into the drama of numbers. Instead, we sense a deep trust in the natural unfolding of all things. Nothing is rushed. Even the fastest expansion is only a single beat in a symphony lasting billions of years. And so, from the boundary of the unknowable, the story continues to flow, carrying a moment of expansion that is both fierce and gentle. It does not strain the listener, because it demands nothing to be grasped. It simply invites us to feel that the universe, from its very first moments, held within it a strange and beautiful capacity, the ability to create order from expansion and beauty from the smallest of vibrations. As we relax into this thought, the heartbeat itself seems to slow, aligning with the ancient breath of space, still expanding, even now, far away, deeply quiet and profoundly steady. The formation of matter and the first light. As that violent expansion gradually settles, the universe seems to have completed its first deep breath. Space has been stretched wide, energy has spread everywhere, and the primordial tension dissolves into a gentler state. No longer an expansion beyond intuition, but a slower, steadier process, one in which everything begins to have time to remain with itself. In this slowing down, temperature begins to fall, and with it, new possibilities quietly emerge. At first, the universe is still far too hot for any structure to endure. Everything exists as a seething sea of energy, where particles appear and vanish in an instant. But as space continues to expand, thermal tension eases, like a room slowly cooling after a sweltering summer day. And within this cooling, fundamental particles begin to linger long enough to recognize one another. They are no longer merely fleeting fluctuations, but start forming the very first connections. There is a delicate beauty in this moment of the cosmic story. No brilliant light, no dramatic spectacle. Only unimaginably small, almost invisible particles learning how to exist together. From the vast ocean of energy, the simplest atomic nuclei gradually appear. Hydrogen, light and unassuming, becomes the foundation. Helium, slightly heavier, follows. They form not because of any guiding hand, but because the conditions have ripened. When temperature and density become just right, combination becomes the natural outcome. Within the space of relaxation, we can imagine this process as a gentle settling, like a lake after a strong wind begins to calm, where suspended particles slowly sink, leaving clarity above. The universe does the same. After its early turbulence, it enters a more stable phase, one in which basic components can form and persist. No rush, no chaos, just a long process of self-adjustment. Yet even as matter begins to take shape, light is still not free. At this stage, the universe resembles a room filled with dense fog. Light is everywhere. But whenever a ray tries to travel far, it immediately collides with charged particles, scattering, changing direction, being held back. Not because light is weak, but because the environment is too dense. Space is not yet clear enough for light to tell its story. This creates a very special condition. The universe is bright, but not transparent. Hot, but not yet radiant. Everything exists in a prolonged opacity, like a dawn hidden behind thick clouds. Light, the messenger that will later carry the universe's story, is for now trapped within the very place of its birth. It waits patiently, unhurried, because time in the universe is always generous. In the meditative rhythm of this narrative, this is a moment that feels deeply relatable. There are periods in our own lives when we carry great energy and potential, yet cannot express them fully. Not because we lack light, but because the surrounding conditions are not yet settled. The universe, in this era, is in a similar state, preparing, waiting for conditions to mature before moving into a new chapter. This preparation does not happen in an instant. It stretches across hundreds of thousands of years, a span unimaginable to humans, yet only a slow beat for the universe. Throughout this time, space continues to expand, temperature continues to fall, particles continue to collide and rearrange. Each collision is a small experiment, each scattering a fine adjustment. There are no mistakes, only process. Gradually, the balance begins to tip towards something new. Charged particles are no longer so restless. They slow down, allowing themselves to remain together for longer. And when this happens, a very important doorway is about to open, not with a loud sound, but with silence. A silence deep enough for light to pass through without obstruction. That moment has not yet arrived, but everything is ready. The universe seems to be holding its breath, not in tension, but in focus. All the necessary elements are in place. The basic ingredients are present. Space is wide enough. The temperature is low enough. Only one small but decisive transition remains before light is released from the primordial fog. In this waiting, the story maintains a very gentle rhythm. It does not push the listener into sudden excitement, but guides them through a soft transitional zone. From energy to matter, from hot to warm, from opaque to transparent. Each step takes time, and each step matters. As the mind rests in this image, a quiet comfort arises. Not everything beautiful appears immediately. Some forms of beauty need time in darkness, in opacity, in waiting. The universe's first light is the same. It does not burst forth suddenly. It is slowly gestated over a long span, so that when it finally appears, it can travel far, very far, carrying the story of those earliest moments all the way to today. And so, from the initial expansion, through stages of gentle settling, the universe prepares for a crucial turning point. Light is still held back, but not for much longer. Space is becoming clearer, little by little. And in that quietness, a new chapter is waiting to be told. One in which ancient light will finally be free to begin its long journey through time and space. The cosmic microwave background, CMB. When the universe has completed its final preparations, when space is wide enough and the temperature gentle enough, the long-awaited moment finally arrives. There is no bell to announce it, no brilliant flash of light. Only a very subtle change, yet one that transforms the entire way the universe can be seen. Charged particles, which had long been restless and disruptive to light, now slow down enough to remain together. Electrons find stable positions around atomic nuclei, forming the first neutral atoms. And in that moment, the opaque veil that had covered the universe for so long is gently lifted. Light, after a long and patient wait, is finally set free. It is no longer reflected back, no longer endlessly scattered. It begins a long journey through the expanding universe, carrying within it the memory of a very early time. This light is not meant to illuminate planets or warm living beings. There is nothing yet to receive it. It simply departs, spreading in all directions, like a soft breath released after a prolonged pause. In the slow, meditative rhythm of this story, the moment resembles a lake becoming completely still, clear enough to reflect the sky above. After hundreds of thousands of turbulent years, the universe finally reaches a state that allows light to pass through without being torn apart. And the miracle is this, that light does not disappear. It is still here, filling all of space, slipping through every gap, reaching even us, after drifting for billions of years. Today, when we look up at the sky, the light from stars and galaxies tells us relatively recent stories. But beneath all those familiar sources lies a much older glow. It does not come from any single object. It comes from the very moment the universe became transparent. A steady whisper, spreading in every direction, unbiased, unselective, a lingering echo of the earliest era. The story of how humans discovered this ancient light carries its own quiet beauty. It was not the result of a deliberate hunt, but of patient coincidence. While attempting to eliminate all sources of noise from their instruments, observers encountered a strange signal. It did not disappear, no matter which direction the equipment was pointed. It did not depend on day or night, season or location. At first, it was merely a technical nuisance. But as every familiar cause was ruled out, what remained began to take on a very different meaning. That noise was not an error. It was the imprint of the young universe. A letter sent from a distant past, written in the language of light and heat. In recognizing this, humanity did more than solve a technical problem. It touched one of the strongest pieces of evidence for the universe's origin story. The Big Bang, once only a bold idea, had left behind a measurable, verifiable fingerprint, one that could even be listened to. This ancient glow is not perfectly uniform. At first glance, it appears smooth and calm, like a flawless backdrop. But when examined more closely, with ever more refined instruments, tiny ripples emerge, extremely subtle temperature differences, so small that without modern technology, we would never notice them. And within these ripples lies a profound story. They are traces of the universe's earliest imperfections, regions that were ever so slightly denser, slightly warmer, where matter gathered just a little more. In those very early moments, such differences seemed insignificant. But over time, under the influence of gravity, they became the seeds of all large-scale structure. From these delicate ripples in ancient light, galaxies, star clusters, and eventually worlds like Earth slowly took shape. There is a beautiful connection here between the nearly invisible and the immense. Tiny fluctuations in ancient light went on to shape the entire architecture of the universe. No detailed blueprint was required, only very small differences, patiently amplified by time. In this, we glimpse a deep lesson about how order can arise from what initially appears imperfect. As humanity continues to listen to this ancient glow with ever more sensitive ears, we begin to read more than just a story about light. From these ripples, we infer the age of the universe, the rate at which space expands, and even the mysterious components that make up most of reality. We come to understand that what we can touch and see is only a very small fraction. Most of the universe is invisible, but not silent. It leaves its mark in the way ancient light fluctuates, in the way space bends and stretches over time. In a meditative state, knowing that most of reality is invisible does not cause unease. On the contrary, it brings a sense of openness. The world is not limited to what we see. There are silent currents, non-luminous structures, unnamed energies quietly shaping everything. And that ancient light, faint and cold though it is, remains honest enough to tell us about all of it. This moment deserves to be seen as the heart of cosmic science. For here, theory and observation meet in rare harmony. No longer mere speculation, and not yet a final answer, just a very early, very real picture preserved through time. A snapshot of the universe when it was still young, before stars and galaxies existed, yet already carrying the potential for everything to come. In the space of sleep, the thought that this light is still quietly passing through our bodies can bring a deep sense of peace. These photons have traveled for billions of years, through every transformation, to arrive here. Touching a human lying still, listening to the universe's story. No urgency, no demand. Just a gentle connection between the present moment and a distant past. And within that connection, we no longer feel outside the story. We are part of its flow. Ancient light does not only tell us about the universe, it reminds us that we too were born from the same process. The atoms in our bodies, the thoughts moving through our minds, can all be traced back to that moment when the universe became transparent and light was set free. As this story settles, there is no need to hold on to every detail. It is enough to keep a single, gentle feeling that an ancient glow is whispering throughout space, telling a story longer than any personal memory. And in this quiet night, as the breath slows, we can allow ourselves to drift with that story, softly, deeply, as if being lulled to sleep by the lingering echo of the universe's earliest light. Matter-antimatter asymmetry. As that ancient light is released and begins its long journey through space, the cosmic story seems to reach a rare moment of clarity. We can see, measure, and listen to echoes of a very early time. Yet precisely at this point, when everything appears illuminated, another question quietly arises, not loud but persistent and deeper than all the rest. If the universe began in perfect balance, if energy created matter and antimatter symmetrically, then why is there a world filled with stars, planets, and life today? Why is there something rather than nothing? In the earliest moments, when temperatures were so high that all particles were merely vibrations in a sea of energy, matter and antimatter appeared in almost equal measure. Every particle had an opposing counterpart, identical in mass, but carrying opposite charge. When they met, there was no conflict, no hesitation. They vanished, returning everything to pure energy. In a perfectly symmetric universe, this process would continue until nothing remained but light. A universe bright, yet empty. No atoms, no stars, no observers. And yet, that is not what happened. Something very small, very subtle, slipped out of perfect balance. Philosophical conclusion and lullaby. As the visions of the universe's distant future slowly dissolve into the vastness of contemplation, when possibilities open and are gently set down without the need to choose, the story begins to slow. Not because there is nothing left to say, but because the moment has come when nothing more needs to be said. After a long journey through birth, expansion, darkness, light, and predictions that stretch far beyond a human lifetime, there is a very natural pause, not an abrupt stop, but a settling, like the surface of a lake after the last ripples fade away. Here, the universe is no longer felt as an object to be studied, but as a space that holds us, no longer as immense numbers or abstract concepts, but as a deep, steady background rhythm, one that existed long before humans appeared and will continue long after all personal traces have faded. Within that rhythm, human existence does not appear as something misplaced, but as a very brief moment that is nonetheless entirely real. We often think of ourselves as the center of our own life stories. Worries, memories, hopes, and fatigue fill the inner space. But when these are placed within the context of the universe, not to make them meaningless, but to see them in a different light, we arrive at a very gentle truth. We are a very small part of a very vast process. A moment of awareness arising within a universe that has existed for billions of years. And precisely because of that smallness, we do not need to carry the full weight of meaning on our shoulders. There's a quiet release in this realization. We do not need to be extraordinary to deserve existence. We do not need to leave an eternal mark to have value. The universe does not ask that of us. It simply allows us to be here for a short while, long enough to feel, long enough to ask questions, long enough to listen to its story. And within that permission, there is a deep generosity. Looking back over the entire journey that has been told, from the first moments of space and time to the distant visions of the future, something becomes clear without needing to be spoken aloud. Humans do not stand outside the universe observing it. We are born from those very processes. The atoms in our bodies were forged in ancient stars. The streams of thought in our minds are the result of structures shaped over billions of years of evolution. We are not strangers to this story. We are a sentence within it. In the space of relaxation, this idea does not need to be analyzed. It can be felt as a gentle warmth, a sense of belonging. As we lie still, allowing the breath to slow and awareness to drift toward the edge of sleep, the universe no longer feels distant. It becomes the backdrop of this very moment. Space surrounds us, time flows, and life is unfolding, quietly, naturally. There is something very beautiful in the way the story closes without truly ending. The universe has no final line. It does not draw a curtain. It simply continues. Galaxies keep drifting. Space keeps expanding. Stars are still being born and fading away. And within a very small portion of that process, humans appear, reflect, and then rest. Nothing needs to be added. No climax is required. the continuation itself is complete. In this rhythm, silence is no longer an empty gap to be filled. It becomes part of the story, a necessary pause where everything that has been said can settle. A place where the mind no longer needs to cling to ideas or images, but can simply remain with the feeling of being present. The universe, in its vastness, does not urge us to understand everything. It allows us not to understand, not to conclude, not to hold on. As sleep draws nearer, our sense of time begins to change. Time is no longer something to manage or worry about. It becomes a broad current within which this moment is only a small ripple. And that does not make the moment any less. On the contrary, it makes it gentler. It does not need to be perfect. It does not need to last. It only needs to be what it is. Perhaps that is the greatest gift the cosmic story can offer at the end of its journey. Not new knowledge, not a final answer, but a feeling of ease. A sense that we are not abandoned in a cold universe. We are supported by the very structure of reality, by the laws that allowed life and awareness to appear, even if only briefly. As these thoughts are allowed to pass without being held, fatigue can begin to dissolve. The great questions no longer press so heavily. They can remain, but they do not need to be solved tonight. The universe took billions of years to become what it is. We do not need to understand it in a single evening. Listening and feeling are already enough. And in this final moment, as the voice of the story grows softer, as attention gently turns inward and only breath and comforting darkness remain, the story does not stop. It continues, without a narrator, without a listener. Ancient photons still glide through space. Galaxies continue to turn. Time keeps flowing. And you, in this very small moment, may allow yourself to rest. There is no need to think further. No need to go anywhere else. Just let go. Like a small planet moving steadily along its orbit, held in place by invisible yet enduring forces. The universe is still there, vast and silent. And within that silence, sleep can arrive, gently and deeply, as a natural part of the process that has always been unfolding